Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 21st of August. I'm Stephen Cowell in London. Coming up today, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook says she won't be bullied into resigning after Donald Trump called for her to quit over allegations of mortgage fraud. The UK's Chancellor Rachel Reeves considers taxing the sale of high-value family homes to plug a multi-billion-pound budget hole. Plus, running out of puff. New data shows the UK's ban on disposable vapes has driven users to treating refillable devices as throwaway products. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook says she won't be bullied into stepping down after calls by President Trump for her to resign over allegations of mortgage fraud. In a statement, she added that she's gathering accurate information to answer any legitimate questions and provide the facts. That's after Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte urged a Justice Department investigation of Cook's mortgages. Speaking earlier to CNBC, Pulte said nobody is above the law.
We refer people every day criminally for mortgage fraud, and no one is above the law. And in this case, it happens to be a Fed governor, and I have an obligation to do something about it. So when we received a tip, this is what we discovered.
Pulte told CNBC that the Fed governor will either have to resign or be fired. If Cook were to exit the position for any reason, it would create another opening for Trump to fill on the Federal Reserve's board as the president piles pressure on the central bank to lower interest rates. Fed officials saw inflation as a bigger threat than job market weakness at their July meeting. According to the latest minutes, the majority of policymakers judge the upside risk to inflation as the greater of these two risks. Bloomberg economist Stuart Paul says there is a line in the Fed minutes that stood out to him.
Several officials are concerned about slower real income growth. Like, that's a little bit of a tip of the hat that the majority that did vote to hold rates steady could have been getting a little bit nervous about the labor market, even as they decided to hold rates steady.
Stuart Paul speaking there as Fed Chair Jerome Powell prepares to deliver a closely watched speech at the central bankers gathering in Jackson Hole tomorrow. The NASDAQ declined for a second straight day on Wednesday, with Mag 7 stocks on their longest losing streak since April. Futures are currently pointing higher for the tech-heavy index, but this week's dip has raised questions if the rally in the sector has gone too far, too fast. For Oaktree Capital Management co-founder Howard Marks, US stocks are in the early days of a bubble.
I'm not raising an alarm bell, but I do think it's time for some caution. No reason to think there'll be a correction soon, but the point is that things are expensive. They may go on to become more expensive, but the fact that they're expensive should not be lost.
Marks added that some technology stocks are quite highly valued relative to history. Some strategists are warning the extra heavy weighting of tech giants could turn any rotation out of the sector into a broader rout. Bloomberg has learned that the UK's Chancellor Rachel Reeves is considering taxing the sale of high-value family homes as she looks for ways to raise revenue in the upcoming budget. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts has the details.
Private residence relief, a long-standing pillar of the tax system, saves homeowners £32 billion a year by exempting primary properties from capital gains tax. We're told that under proposals being considered by officials, properties above a specified threshold, potentially £1.5 million, would be liable for CGT at 18 or 24%. With the budget months away, the Treasury is looking for ways to raise as much as £51 billion to patch up the public finances. Any moves to tax primary residences would likely prove highly controversial. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
European leaders are discussing a NATO-like security guarantee for Ukraine. The plan is being pushed by Italy's Giorgia Meloni and would sign Kyiv's allies up to providing military support if Ukraine is attacked by Russia again. It's one of a range of ideas being pitched by Europe to the White House, which Vice President J.D. Vance says is grappling with a problem.
Number one is Ukraine wants to know that it's not going to get invaded again by Russia. It wants to know that it's got territorial integrity long into the future. The Russians want certain pieces of territory, most of which they've occupied, but some of which they haven't. So that is really where the meat of the negotiation is. The Ukrainians want security guarantees. The Russians want a certain amount of territory.
Vance's comments come after a meeting between Donald Trump and European leaders at the White House led to a firmer US commitment to security guarantees. At the same time, Trump ruled out sending soldiers to Ukraine, but said the US might provide air support. And Israel's military says it's taken the first steps of a planned operation to take over Gaza City. The state is calling up 60,000 reservists to prepare for the offensive, which one official said had effectively already started. More than 62,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war in Gaza, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Earlier in the week, Hamas accepted a ceasefire plan put forward by Qatar and Egypt, which Israel has yet to formally respond to. And those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index just flat to the downside at the moment. Eurostoxx 50 futures are down by 0.1%. We're watching NASDAQ futures, which are a little higher now after the sell-off we've seen in tech shares over the past couple of days. 10-year Treasury yield holding steady at 4.29% ahead of the start of the Jackson Hole meeting. Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up by 0.1%. In a moment, we'll bring you more on the pressure on the Fed from Donald Trump, plus why the UK's ban on disposable vapes doesn't seem to be changing consumer behaviour. But first, another story that I've been reading this morning on how visitors to Japan are driving the revival of a fashion brand made famous by the film Kill Bill. Bloomberg Opinion's Gerard Reedy has been writing about the record sales of an Onitsuka tiger shoes worn by Uma Thurman's character in bright yellow in the 2003 Tarantino film. Now, the more recent spike in popularity has come from visitors to Japan. It's actually doubled revenue for the brand in a year and pushed its owner ASICS to open shops, especially dedicated to this brand in Paris and in the United States. Gerard writes that this is the flip side of some of the complaints that have been made in Japan about over-tourism. Think about companies like Sanrio, famous for Hello Kitty, that are seeing tourists drive 40% of its sales in Japan. Now, this is part of a broader popularity of some of these brands that have made success at home, thanks to those people who are visiting. Of course, a lot of that related to the weaker yen, but also the broader aspirations that consumers have around affordability, high quality, and an aesthetic minimalism that consumers are associating with Japan. Think about the likes of Uniqlo capitalising on this globally. Its overseas revenues overtook what it earns in Japan in 2022. So perhaps the influx of tourists isn't so bad after all. The brands are positioned to perhaps benefit over the longer and broader term from this surge in numbers in visitors to Japan, as Gerard Reedy puts it, turning Japan's soft power into hard profits. You can read the piece on Bloomberg.com, and we'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes as well. Well, let's bring you more now on that meeting of central bankers in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, getting underway later on. This comes as the US president has stepped up his attacks on the Fed Governor Lisa Cook on top of his campaign against the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Bloomberg Opinion columnist Daniel Moss joins me now for more. Daniel, good to talk to you. Is Donald Trump's call for Lisa Cook to resign a major escalation of his attacks on the Fed?
Yes, it is, because the implication is that they are prepared to delve into the fine print of the personal affairs, financially at least, of FOMC officials. And they may go beyond that. The existing vacancy on the board occurred because Adrienne Kugler, whose term was to expire in January, announced she would step aside. Now, she had missed the FOMC meeting immediately prior to that, citing personal reasons. So I see this as being something in an altogether different category. This is certainly a new front in the campaign.
Now, of course, all of this is happening as central bankers are going to Jackson Hole for their annual symposium, officially focusing on the US labour market. But with the global cast that's arriving in Wyoming, are they going to be more worried about central bank independence than perhaps some of the economic data?
Well, I think they'll be worrying about both. There's no question that journalists, quite justifiably, will be asking anyone they run into their opinion on the heavying of the Fed by the White House. There's no question about that. What else comes up at Jackson Hole? Well, we'll see. It's not a guarantee that the chair will tip his hand on upcoming FOMC meetings. By the way, just before this conversation, I was refreshing my memory about some famous Jackson Hole addresses by then chairs. And some of them that have lived on through the years were not about tipping upcoming policy meetings at all. Alan Greenspan was famous for saying that monetary policy shouldn't be used to prick asset bubbles. I'm sure you're familiar with that line. That was said at the 1999 Jackson Hole. In the early 2000s, he ruminated on the role of technology and how it was changing the labour force. Ben Bernanke's final Jackson Hole, he didn't even speak. So, let's actually see what happens here. The formal topic is the labour market and demographics, and that is a rich vein to mine at the best of times.
I mean, this is coming at a time when the data is starting to show some weakness in the labour market. We did just have the meetings of the last Federal Reserve meeting showing that policymakers were more worried about inflation than the labour market. Is that the duality that Fed policymakers now need to focus on? And I suppose, how much could the balance have shifted since the last meeting?
Well, look, it's important to remember that Congress, which created the Fed in 1913, has given it a dual mandate, two primary mandates, price stability and the promotion of full employment. Employment is really a proxy for economic growth. The last couple of job numbers, whether you contest the process that led to their publication or not, were not good news. They do point to a weakening labour market. And the two Fed governors who dissented at the last meeting made clear that was all about the labour market. The labour market can't be ignored. It's never ignored. It's one of the two pillars by which the Fed is supposed to set policy.
Okay, Daniel Moss, Bloomberg Opinion columnist, thank you very much for joining us. And you can read Daniel's latest writings at bloomberg.com/opinion. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Well, let's turn here to the UK now, where new figures show that a ban on disposable vapes is failing to limit the environmentally damaging waste from the devices. Data from Nielsen IQ, seen by Bloomberg, show that consumer behaviour doesn't appear to have shifted since the ban came into effect earlier this year. Our reporter Harry Black is here with more on this story. Harry, good morning. Let's start then with what the new data has told us. The ban on disposable vapes came into force in June. What does the data tell us about what's changed since?
So this Nielsen IQ data, it's part of a wider data set on grocery shopping in the UK, and it also includes online shops as well. And it's a sample size. So if you look at July and June, for example, 2 months after the ban was introduced, the sales of pods were actually a lot lower than the devices themselves. And you would think post-ban that because people are reusing devices, you'd see a lot more pod sales. So if you look at July, there was about 7.8 million kits sold in this sample compared to about 5 million pods. So not something we expected to see.
Yeah, and very interesting to indicate how consumers are responding to that ban on disposable vapes. What have the companies involved in this, the big tobacco and vape manufacturers, said about it?
So the legacy big tobacco manufacturers have actually been quite strong in their approach to this issue. They've always been pro-regulation with the government since even before the ban was introduced. Imperial Brands actually sent in a letter to DEFRA last month. They said they were looking for stronger guidance from the government. And one of the big loopholes that they were trying to challenge was the fact that convenience stores and supermarkets, although they're legally obligated to buy reusable vapes, they're not legally obligated to buy the pods that go with them. So a lot of consumers are finding they're buying these reusable vapes, but they're not being able to buy the pods that go with them. And that's something Imperial's saying. They've also said, they told me that sales for pods is not as big as what they'd expected to see. So that was, I think, quite striking. And then BAT is also saying similar things, and they're pushing on the government for stronger reform. And that's probably something we're going to see soon.
Well, talk to me about how the UK government has approached this issue and how they've responded to it.
Well, the UK government has said that the disposable vapes ban was part of robust measures to ensure that we tackled youth vaping in the country and to stop the environmental damaging aspects of disposable vapes. Material Focus last year reported that about 8 million vapes being disposed of in the wrong way last year. That's about 13 every second. Every other day there's been fires linked to vapes being disposed of incorrectly because of the lithium-ion battery. So the government is saying it was part of robust measures that they took to combat some of these issues. They've put more officers in trading standards to ensure that convenience stores and these new rules are better enforced. But of course, everyone is obviously waiting on the new tobacco and vapes bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that bill as well. Currently in committee stage at the House of Lords. What could change with consumer behaviour in that bill?
So the regulation for this new policy seems to be going at two-tier speed, if that makes sense. So we had this ban come in June, but if you went into a vape store or a supermarket, most of the vapes on the shelves looked exactly the same. So what the government is now trying to do with the tobacco and vapes bill is pass broader legislation that's bringing in new rules on smoking, youth smoking, nicotine pouches, but vaping as well. They're also trying to regulate the packaging, the design, the taste, the price, all of those sorts of things, which many people are saying are leading to kids in the country starting to vape. So you've got vape brands in the country now with bright pink colours, which are very appealing to children, and that's something the government's trying to combat.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.